right, so there's a lot of talk about sexual immorality or sex and sin that is sexual in nature. And here's what I'll say about it is that we'll stop and we'll think of a secular and worldly point of view first, unspiritual in all its ways, and then we'll talk about biblical philosophy. Um, Clearly, the Bible, in most people's opinion of it, depicts marriage first and then sex between a husband and wife. Um, Sometimes there's more than one woman or more than one wife or concubines, wives and concubines or whatever. And anything outside of that is considered to be fornication or breaking the marriage covenant is considered adultery. We're told like to keep the marriage bed pure, which means if it's not you and your wife, then it's impure to some people. Um, but we can talk about what I think would be sinful things that are just unnatural, probably rape and incest and violence towards people, like forced intercourse or forced sexual contact of any kind, child molestation and things like that, probably definitely are going to be sin. Um, whether you're a Christian or not, I think you could believe that. Um, yeah, so there's like sex with animals and stuff like that. It's off limits. It's taboo and nothing else. It's going to embarrass your family and bring shame to your home country if you do it. Okay, it's not good to do that. Um, yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, how hard can it really be? Are you allowed to do like extra stuff besides missionary position? Like, people get too far into it. It's like, yes, you are. I think you can do whatever you want with your wife. Those are the rules as I see them. Outside of that, if you have an intimate friend, a lover that you sleep with, it's between you and God. I think what your convictions are on that is up to you. We're not going to have like a public statement issued that says that no one can do that because it's a free country. But if you read the scripture, there's kind of like rules to how that's done. The reason I think is because of the risk. Um, the old covenant was established in part, I think, to eliminate harm, or as a means to reduce the harm that is done by people living in a society together that have their own form of government now, right? So Moses brings the Israelites, the Hebrew children, out of slavery, where they were held captive or whatever, held against their will and forced to do labor for someone they didn't like. And so they get their own nation and they begin to govern themselves according to how the prophet sees that God is saying that they should. And so that's what they ended up with. They had their own judges and they had their own officers of the law. They had their own courts and they had law. And the God's law was the law of the land. There was no argument. You see, so there was specific penalties. All throughout, you have some people that kind of break the rules. They cheat a little bit, and you sometimes see severe consequences for doing that because probably of the way that they deal with it when they're being found out. Sometimes, uh, generally speaking, murder to cover up adultery is not a good idea. Um, um, Yeah, so I mean, you get kicked out of the military for certain kinds of sexual immorality. I think adultery's still on that list. I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes sense to me that if the government frowns on it, then you might not want to do it. It's risky to have unprotected sex, so you can spread VD. We don't want that in a nation of priests and kings, right? A nation of shamans who shine the light of God to other nations. We don't want that, right? We don't want people flea bitten laying in the bed with dogs, right? We want people that are in covenant together and they make smart decisions with their sexuality and the perversions. They keep that shit private. If it ever comes up, maybe they talk to a priest about it. You see what I'm saying? So that's the way I see it. Is that people sometimes people do have perverse ideas and perverse thoughts and and taboo fetishes and stuff like that, and that's their private personal affairs, and they should keep it private. They should keep it private. That's my opinion. That stuff is not for kids. That stuff is really not even for young adults to me, because they're not responsible enough to raise kids yet on their own. In many or most cases, they're not finished with their primary education yet. They're not into a vocation yet. They haven't had professional training. They haven't learned any developed any skills yet. They can't manage money. They don't have their own house. Things like that. So they should probably be more focused on career building than having sex. So this is where I have a problem with like grooming people for trafficking and stuff like that. And it's just like it's not fair to do that to people, to select for them what they'll be in life. In a free country, we don't do that. So this is kind of like that. Our founders, some of them saw us like the Israelites, forming our own nation against the tyranny and the overlordship of a foreign country who was no longer supposed to be in charge of us. So that's run into some of that today, and I think that we might be getting groomed to normalize some things that shouldn't be normalized. That's all I got.